Hey everyone, so I mentioned in my update video a few months back, once I finished Final Fantasy XVI, I would be making a first impressions video, not any kind of in-depth review, but just an informal thing where I kind of shoot my thoughts on the game for a bit without having to worry about, like, careful script writing or editing or anything like that. So that's what I'm here to do right now. It's been basically a month of playing it consistently, a very busy month where I was also trying to finish the Tears of the Kingdom review, so that definitely took a while. Longer than it normally would have taken me, but I finally finished it, and I just want to talk about it for a bit now. I didn't record any footage on my first playthrough, I didn't take notes or anything like that, so these are just my loose thoughts after one playthrough. There won't be any spoilers, so don't worry about that if you haven't finished yet, but if you just want to hear my thoughts, yeah, stick around. So just to lay it all out there from the start, I absolutely loved the game. I don't think it's completely without faults, of course, and there are a few areas in which I think there's a lot of room for improvement, but God, this has got to be one of the best, and it's got to be the best Final Fantasy game in the last 20 years, and that's not recency bias talking. I genuinely did love it that much. Anyways, to get more into specifics now, during the build-up to this game, I remember the developers constantly brought up how they approached this project with four key pillars of focus. Those were narrative, characters, visuals, and battles. And I think with every single one of these, they absolutely crushed it. The story here, just to start with that, with narrative, the story here is absolutely massive in scope. It spans across 18 years, follows the political landscape of 2 different continents, as well as the personal stakes of all the key figures. There's a lot going on at any given point, but I found it all super engaging. I was glued to the screen the whole time. It can be a lot to follow, but they introduced this thing called Active Time Lore, which basically lets you get a refresher on like relevant terms or figures at any point in the story. You just hold the touchpad down, even during cutscenes, and it'll just bring up everything that's relevant at the moment. It's incredibly useful. It was a great quality of life feature. It really helped me keep track of what could have been a very difficult to follow story, because there is a lot going on, but that made it all so much manageable, which I really appreciated. And I'm really happy about that, because this is definitely a story that's worth following. It starts off with this fantastic sequence, and immediately you get to invested in Clive in the Kingdom of Rosaria, and then from there, the game does a good job of expanding outwards slowly, so it's never too overwhelming, but you gradually get to see more and more of Valisea. But you're never, like, drowning in the politics of it all. It's very well handled. I've heard some people say that the story falls off after a certain point. I guess I agree to an extent. There's one story moment, I want to say like 80% of the way through, that I think is just so incredibly good that anything coming off of that, it feels like a bit of a crash down. But I don't think the story is ever weak. Like, even in that crash down, I think it's still pretty good and entertaining. I think the game's able to reach that extremely high quality again when it comes back to the ending. Like, it starts pretty good, ramps up to incredible, drops back down to pretty good, and then gets incredible again by the end. So it just takes a little bit of a dip, but I never think it's bad or even close, like, at all. Yeah, it's really engaging the entire time, regardless of where you are in the game, and even after the drop-off, yeah, it's able to reach the high quality again, like I said. The final scenes here, the ending especially, just completely floored me in the best way possible. That's really all I can say without spoilers. But I will say it topped Final Fantasy XV's ending for me, which is saying a lot. If you remember from my review on that back years ago, I loved the ending to that game so much. And I love this one even more. I don't know if it tops 10 for me. I think it's my second favorite ending in the entire series, which is saying a lot. I loved the ending, that's all I can say. It's like one of my favorite video game moments. I was just completely floored by what they did with it. Anyways, the next pillar was the characters, which kind of directly plays into the story. Once again, I thought they were all excellent. Clive is very obviously the centerpiece here. He's the protagonist. So a lot of the story plays around him and seeing his life develop over this 18-year period. But because of that, I've seen some people say that comes at the expense of a more well-developed party. I couldn't disagree more, though. This is a case where I can't really go in depth without spoilers again, but I really liked all the important players in this story, and there are a lot of them. Cid is easily my favorite Final Fantasy Cid now. There's not really that much competition aside from 7, but I liked him more than 7 Cid. Jill, I think, has a very heartwarming story that I really enjoyed. Even a lot of the villains I really enjoyed. Hugo especially, he was super intimidating. As well as Dion. I don't know if Dion even counts as a villain. Again, not to get into spoilers. But Dion, definitely one of my favorite characters. yeah, I mean, I could go on and on with examples, but I really just thought they were incredible across the board. I also have to say, every single voice actor in the game is fantastic. They elevate these characters to new heights. This is definitely some of the best English voice acting I have ever heard in a game at all. No, not even just in a game, just like in media in general. The voice acting is astounding. And this is especially impressive for a Japanese-developed game. Localization team killed it. I know it's the same localization team behind 14, but yeah, killed it. Next pillar, the visuals. I'm to nobody's surprise here. Just like every mainline Final Fantasy game up to this point, this is one of the best looking games ever made that we have right now. I'm not surprised by the visuals at all. I'm definitely in awe of them though, specifically during cutscenes. There's so much detail packed into all the environments and the character models, and all the lighting looks incredible, and so do the reflections off of materials and everything. It's just like a constantly stunning game, and it's not any different when you're actually in the action. I do want to quickly note that, obviously the game is beautiful. It does occasionally come at the cost of performance, unfortunately. But I think that the performance issues in this game have been pretty heavily exaggerated online, a bit overblown. I played it on performance mode, which prioritized frame rate. Sadly, this was clearly not optimized that well. Definitely not prioritized, I guess I should say. They expected more people to play on graphics mode, which isn't really the case. I think most people play performance mode across the board, but anyways, clearly optimized for graphics mode over performance mode. A little bit disappointing. I did notice multiple dips, especially in the more chaotic moments, but even then it was never too bad. I'm pretty sure the frame rate stayed at least above 30 for my entire playthrough. It's slightly disappointing that the game couldn't hold a constant 60, but I've seen some people say that the game runs poorly, which I don't really agree with. Maybe it's because I just came off of Tears of the Kingdom, which genuinely runs very poorly. But I didn't think this was bad at all. Most of the time I barely even noticed. It's just every now and then I'd be like, ooh, that's not that's not quite 60. It dipped a little bit, but it's fine. The last pillar they had was battles, which I feel like has the most to talk about. I'll start with the combat system, which I think is generally the most contentious point about the game in general. Yes, it is fully action combat, but what I find really weird about the backlash against this game in this area is that this is not the first time in the series to have real-time combat. I would personally argue we've been moving this way ever since Final Fantasy IV in 1991. Which technically ditched the turn-based system, even then, for the ATB system. And I know a lot of people will still say, oh, that's still basically turn-based. Okay, even since then, the only turn-based game we've had is 10. 11 and 12 evolved ATB to include auto attacks, and it very much happened in real time with you moving around, just random encounters, that kind of thing. 13 went back to a more standard ATB, but kind of stretched it to, you can tell they stretched it to its limit. It's a very strange combat system. I don't know. 13's a weird game. 14 was straight up real time. There's no debating that. But even if you don't count the MMOs, so was 15. I don't get why people are acting like this is a sudden pivot for the series. It's a direction we've been moving in for a very long time, and this isn't even really that far of a jump. I mean, just to say it right now, I've heard some people say it's not a Final Fantasy game, and that's not just because of the real-time combat. But honestly, this has more series elements than I would expect, even compared to something like 15. So why people are getting all up in arms about this now, that's kind of baffling to me. I don't get it. As for the combat itself, I mean, do you like DMC? That's the comparison, excuse me, that's the comparison that a lot of people have been making, but that's for a reason. It's extremely similar. They don't try to hide it. It's pretty blatant. They even got the same combat designer. And I will say, when I heard that, I was kind of expecting some more frenetic movement. I mean, it's very much like DMC mechanically. I was expecting it to feel more like DMC in action. It feels, to be honest, like a dumbed-down DMC. That's just what it is. Yeah, the movement was a lot less frenetic. That's the main thing for me. It's actually quite tame in comparison to a lot of character action games. You have a lot of the same moves, but they just, I don't know, they feel more watered down, I guess. But the more you play with it, the more you realize the depth is still absolutely there. Most of it comes through your abilities. You're kind of drip-fed these pretty much throughout the game. I found myself constantly experimenting, trying to figure out the most efficient ways to take down enemies, and that never really got stale. The depth is there, the customization is there in this aspect. It's just something you kind of have to play with for a bit to get used to it. And it does start out very simple. You know, the very beginning of the game has these extremely basic tutorials where it's like, come on, I've played a video game before. I can figure this out. You didn't have to dumb it down this far. But it gets there. And yeah, it gets there. To be honest, though, I do think that I prefer the combat in Final Fantasy VII Remake just a bit more. As for the action combat games we've had in the series, we've had 15, we've had 7 Remake. I guess you could count Stranger of Paradise. And then we've had 16. I wouldn't really count Stranger of Paradise. I think that's more its own thing. But out of those, yeah, I think I still prefer Final Fantasy VII Remake. Because I like the way that game had a hybrid style more. It really was like the same structure of the classic ATV battles, but with real-time moves. So, I mean, someone made the point that 7 Remake was basically just doing the 12 thing, where you have the same battle setup, but there's auto attacks happening in between, except instead of auto attacks, you're able to have more direct control. It feels a lot better. You're actually the one attacking. Things like that. I think that's the best marriage of old and new for me, is 7 Remake. I still think I prefer that, but that's not to say that this combat style is bad at all, and I don't think there is a definitive direction for the series going forward or anything. I just want to lay my preference out there. I do think 7 Remake is what I want to see going forward in the series more. I'd like to see more of that kind of hybrid style. But I also want to say, I mentioned 15 earlier, this is a huge improvement on 15's combat. It's way more fun, way more involved. I know I praised the combat a while ago in my review, like I mentioned earlier. But honestly, since then, I've come to sour on it just a little bit. I don't think it's bad. Definitely not as bad as some people will claim. But it's a lot more hands-off than I implied in my review. Looking back at footage, I'm like, maybe I was a little generous there. Maybe I cut it a little bit too much slack. I don't think it's that great a combat system. I think it's weird. I think it does the job, but it's not like, I wouldn't say it's one of the best or anything really even that close either. Anyways, I got sidetracked. Getting back to the combat in 16, I think it's at its absolute best in the middle of boss battles, whether that's like full-on boss battles or mini-bosses. These require you to be more careful about movement, bring in more active management about your abilities, and they just generally provide more of a threat and more of a thrill. More of a threat and more of a thrill than standard encounters ever really did. This applies to mini-bosses as well, to a smaller extent. Basically, any battle that isn't against a standard enemy, I typically found it really engaging because standard enemies don't really pose any kind of threat at all. I mean, the game is generally pretty easy, which is fine. I would have liked standard enemies to fight back at least a little bit, though. But boss battles are a ton of fun. Because they don't just stand there like punching bags. I mean, they're actively attacking you. You gotta stay out of the way more, be careful, make more decisions. Also, with a lot of these boss battles, you can really tell it's the 14 team working on this game. Because they use kind of similar positional attacks to that game. I liked them there, I like them here. Obviously, the combat in this game is a bit more directly involved moment to moment than 14. That's a bit of a generalization. They're very different combat systems with very different goals, and the boss fights play to each. The boss fights are great. The real highlight of the game is the icon fights. These are absolutely spectacular. I mean, every time you come across one of these, it's total bliss. It's always the highlight of the game, and it's usually the conclusion to like a story arc too. So you have that narrative drive alongside just truly unrivaled spectacle. I mean, this is like nothing I've ever seen in a game before. These blew my mind. They're so good. Remember the Leviathan fight in Final Fantasy 15? Imagine that, but you have to do more than just hold one button to win. And there's like 5 of them across the game. There's so many, and they're so good. They're all just remarkable. I mean, I'd even go as far as to say these are my favorite boss fights in the series. They're legitimately that great. The Bahamut fight especially, oh my god. That was like one of the most incredible things I've ever seen in a game. Just no exaggeration. Blew my mind. It had me thinking like, games don't get better than this in that moment. I was like, this is incredibly good. So once you get to the Bahamut fight, that's when you know. That's the moment I was talking about earlier when I thought like, this peaks. It doesn't get better than this. That's what I was thinking about. The icon fights, they're just incredible. I don't have anything more to say about them. Nothing but positives. So as far as the 4 pillars go, yeah, they crushed it. Practically no complaints in any of those areas. It's once we start straying outside of those, I start to take a few issues. I really have two main problems. The first of which is the one thing that I'll say is genuinely bad about the game. There is a ridiculous amount of filler quests in the main story. Like the main story quest line, especially in the second half. There are points where there's required mandatory missions that consist of like fetch quests that don't really have anything to do with the story, and they go on for way longer than I would have liked them to. Every time they show up, they just like obliterate the pace of the game. By the very end of the game, whenever I got to one of these, I just started skipping cutscenes, and whenever I inevitably replay it, I'm going to be doing the same thing, because they add nothing. They should have been made side content, is what should have happened. I don't know why they're in the main story, though, because, like, the game itself is plenty long as it is. Like, even if you took all of these out, you'd still have a solid, like, 30 to 35 hour adventure. And it would have been paced much better, for sure. And that's what I wish they had done. I wish they had just taken these... Okay, I'll rephrase it. You don't get nothing out of it. You get a little bit of world building out of each one. But that's about it. You should have made them side content. So it's completely up to your discretion to do it, whether you want to or not, and whenever you want to. So you're not, like, in the grasp of the story. You just finish this awesome fight and then go, like, search around town for this missing girl that has nothing to do with the plot. Like... It's just not fun. I got bored whenever these happened. If you've played Final Fantasy XIV, it's a very similar kind of issue that game had, at least throughout the A Realm Reborn section. I haven't played much past that, to be honest. But yeah, they feel a lot more egregious here, because it's like, this is a tightly crafted, linear, narrative-driven experience. So when that goes away, like when the narrative goes away, it feels like you're wasting your time. Speaking of side quests, I didn't really like these either. Like I said earlier, you can really tell it was the 14 working on this, and that's for the better in things like bosses and storytelling, but it also means that the side quest design is weak. These are very much MMO tier fetch quests, and just like in MMOs, I don't care for them at all. I did a few at the start of the game just to see what they were like, and every single time I did one, I felt like I got nothing out of it. There's one, like, super early on where you're in a restaurant and, like, the restaurant owner says, hey, I need help delivering meals. And you do that, and you have, like, a 10-second conversation with each customer. And it's like, okay, that's it. You get, like, 100 gil or something like that. And I'm like, why did I do that? That was such a waste of time. I would have rather just gone on with the main story quest. That's not true. So, okay. I did a few at the start, and then I did all the ones with the plus signs on them after that. So, because those actually give you gameplay perks, so those I was okay with, even if they were kind of boring. But, I mean, the rest of them, you just get nothing out of it. So I skipped pretty much all of those. Maybe there was a point where, like, you know, they put one on the way to the next main story quest, so I'm like, I might as well. It's gonna take, like, 10, not even 10, it's gonna take, like, 2 minutes. It'll probably just be a quick combat encounter. So I just did that because I could, and it didn't really take anything. But all the ones, like, scattered across towns, I just completely ignored. Yeah. I have heard that apparently towards the back end of the game, the side quests start to be pretty good. But I didn't do them. So maybe on a future playthrough, I'll check them out to see if what people are saying are true. But... nah, you could not get me to sit through most of these side quests. There's a bunch of them, too. Like, there were so many exclamation marks I ignored. I don't know. It doesn't seem like anyone likes them either, so I don't know why they bothered putting so many when they could have just had a few that were really good. I don't know. The quest design is weak. It's not it. This next part isn't really a problem, just a preference more than anything, but... I really think the game could have used some more involved RPG mechanics. There were a lot of people before the game came out. It's like, yeah, it's an action RPG, but they took the RPG out of it, and I was like, nah, that's ridiculous. I'm sure it'll be fine. Playing the game, they were kind of right. I mean, like, I don't know. What we have here in complexity is shockingly close to the original Final Fantasy I. Like. And if you had seen my review of this game that of Final Fantasy I that I just did, I kind of blazed that game for being outdated and, like, overly simple. I don't think it's as big an issue here because there is so much substance in other areas to make up for it. But, I mean, wow, there really just is, like, so little in terms of customization or agency for the RPG mechanics. You have leveling up, which feels completely pointless. I never felt like a level up actually made me stronger. It was just like, oh, the number went up, okay. And that was about it. Yeah, so it never really felt like I made much progress in that area. You do have equipment, but, I mean, it's like the Final Fantasy I equipment. There's no, like, special perks or anything. It's just a numbers game. It's bigger numbers better, and that's it. You do have accessories, but they never really have any kind of special abilities or anything. What they will do is they'll make certain combat abilities stronger. It's either that, or they'll have, like, a God of War 4 type thing, where it's, like, 4% more poison resistance, so it's either they make certain abilities stronger or they're useless. Like, you're never going to use those. The bulk of customization in this game comes from the ability screen. And to be fair, there is quite a bit you can do in this. Like I said, I was constantly experimenting in this area. They drift feed you abilities throughout the game, so in that sense, it feels like you're getting stronger. You get stronger and stronger abilities as you go on. And you get more leeway with how you're allowed to customize it. The more ability points you get, the more you can master these abilities and move them onto other icons. There was depth there. That I was happy with. I wish there was more of that in the other areas. I wish there was more to do when it comes to character building, whether that was like some kind of class system or something. I don't know. They could have done something. Yeah, I just wish there was more to it. I don't really think that more involved RPG mechanics are incompatible with anything else going on in this game. It just clearly wasn't the focus, and, like, I get that. It's not necessarily an issue because there is so much substance everywhere else, like I said, but I don't know. I wish they would have turned it in a different direction. I think for Final Fantasy, like, kind of the quintessential RPG series in my mind, it's a bit weird to see them regress back this far in this area. That really shocked me, not gonna lie. Yeah, I wish they had turned in a different direction. And also just to quickly talk about the whole, like, there's no party members complaint that some people have. First off, that's not really entirely true. There are characters that accompany you. You just can't choose or customize them at all, and they're not playable. So I think not having to, to adhere to a strict party was definitely the right move for this story. It allows certain scenes to narrow the focus a bit on who's actually important in the moment. So there's not just a bunch of people just like standing around during important scenes. That's been the case in some other games. It doesn't necessarily bother me, but I appreciate having something a bit more focused here. Maybe having more party members could have helped the RPG mechanics be a bit more fleshed out. Like, I saw one review that recommended that they could have had different icons assigned to different party members, and that would have been where the depth lied, and you could switch between them in combat. And you could have customized them each to that extent, and it just could have made a more interesting experience. Maybe that's the case, but I feel like doing that and having a consistent party in this story constantly active, I think that would require so many moving parts of the project to be shifted around. Game development is complicated, and this game already took 7 years to create, as streamlined as it is. Shifting things around like that, I mean, this is just the direction they went in with this game, and that's fine. I wish they went in a different direction, but I mean, it is what it is. It's not necessarily a problem. I just think it's a bit of a weird approach for them to take for a new Final Fantasy game. Yeah, RPG mechanics are definitely lacking. But all that being said, I don't really think this is something that we need to be concerned about for the future of the series, because Final Fantasy is at a point, and has been for quite a long time now, where every new game is so different from the last. I mean, ideas are still taken from a bunch of different previous games, but each mainline installment goes in a totally new direction. I mean, it's been that way ever since Final Fantasy XI. You start with 11, you look at every mainline game up to that point, none of them play like each other. Like, they're all so different. Probably the closest is, like, 11 and 14, just because they're both MMOs. But even then, there's a ton of difference there. But yeah, that direction for the series, or I guess not even really lack of direction, but just the way the series has such a distinct identity, or how every installment, I should say, has a distinct identity. I don't think that's ever going to change. I would honestly be pretty shocked if Final Fantasy XVII comes out and it plays exactly like 16 with the same structure and similar combat and tone and all of that. I would expect the next game to once again be very different from anything that came before, whenever that is. So I think when it comes to Final Fantasy, there's a very clear progression for the first 10 games. Like, they very much play off of the last, directly evolve, things like that. But then after that, everything that comes, like, okay, it uses everything that came before to craft something that's unique in its own way. So, like, it'll, like, I don't know, just thinking off the top of my head, 13 took a lot of aspects from 10, but it doesn't really play much like 10, especially in regards to the combat. Yeah. So, yeah. Took a lot of aspects from 10, and even from other games in the series aesthetically. Basically, every Final Fantasy game that comes out now is kind of this conglomerate of past series ideas and new ideas. And I don't expect that to change anytime soon, if ever. I don't think 16 is representative of a new direction for the series. That's really what I'm trying to say here. I will say, though, on the topic of, like, what they could do in the future, just as a longtime fan, I would absolutely love to see the mainline series take another crack at a turn-based game with a more involved combat system than certain classic titles. Like, I know there's a lot of fans saying, like, oh, why did Final Fantasy abandon turn-based? First off, that was 20 years ago, so it's kind of annoying at this point. But yeah, we haven't had a real turn-based game or even an ATB game in quite a while at this point. I would love to see them take another crack at that. I mean, you have games like SMT and Persona, and I haven't played these, but apparently the new Yakuza games as well are also, like, shifting to turn-based. And it's clear there's still a very big market for these. I mean, these are all games that are selling and performing very well. So I think it'd be awesome. I think it'd make a lot of people happy to have Final Fantasy take another crack at turn-based. I definitely really like it. Anyways, I totally got sidetracked there. Back to 16 itself. Like I said, it's not quite perfect, but I do think that its slight failings, and I know I spent a lot of time on the faults, I think they are slight failings in the grand scheme of things, and they are more than made up for by the 4 pillars of focus. You can really tell these are what they focused on for the game, because they absolutely crushed it. Every single one of them, they just nailed it. And because of those 4 pillars, I really think those are the core aspects of the game, and because of those, this is easily the best modern Final Fantasy game for me. Everything from 11 onward, this is the best. And I've thought about this a lot. I don't think it's recency bias talking. I genuinely just think this is the best game we've gotten in the series in quite a long time. I want to commend the clear, consistent vision that this project had from its inception, and how transparent they were about what that vision was from the start. The dev team was clearly on top of it the whole time, and the fact that the game was completely finished a whole 3 months ahead of release with no plans for a day 1 patch is so refreshing. The game did end up getting one, but apparently it changed next to nothing, so a very minor thing. The game also launched with no plans for any DLC, which made me so happy, coming off of Final Fantasy XV and that game's approach with so much DLC, and so many important parts of the story locked behind the DLC chapters. I hated that. And I'm so glad that they've made a hard turn from that game in that sense. The whole team in general. I say he in regards to Yoshi P because he's very much been, like, at the front of promotion for this game. But just the whole team in general, they had such a clear, like, finger on the pulse of the community, in the sense that they understood a lot of the issues people had with 13 and 15, and I feel like in a lot of ways, this was such a direct response to that, and even, like, the way that apparently development went very smoothly. I can tell, like, this is not a rushed game. This is a very, very polished game. I'd say more polished than pretty much any other game I've played on release in a while. I mean, so few games live up to that. I'm kind of praising them for what I feel should be the bare minimum, but so few games live up to the bare minimum in my mind. Like, especially now, like, I don't know, it's just so nice to have a game come out on release that is this polished, that was this ready to just get out there. Like, I feel like that's so rare now. So yeah, Final Fantasy XVI is great. The team behind it just killed it. I'm so glad this was the first mainline game in the series that I was lucky enough to experience at launch. Yeah, this was the first Final Fantasy game I picked up day one. And I'm so satisfied with this game. Like I said, there's a few areas that I wish they had kind of taken in a different direction. But I mean, overall, this is just an overwhelmingly positive experience in the areas that count. I'm so glad this was my first new Final Fantasy game, I guess. That's pretty much everything I have to say about it. Thank you for listening. It was so nice to just do like an easy laid-back video, especially after that Tears of the Kingdom review took so much out of me. Yeah, so now I'm gonna keep working on my long overdue review this time, like a full scripted edited review of Final Fantasy II. I started the script for this one months before the Tears of the Kingdom released, and then life got... I'm sorry, I totally read my notes wrong on that. I did not start it months before Tears of the Kingdom released. I started it months ago, before Tears of the Kingdom released. Sorry about that. And then that game dropped. I put too much time into that game. Life got out of hand. I got super busy. And then I got super busy trying to finish the Tears of the Kingdom video. God, editing for that one was such a nightmare. Having to pool through all that footage. Jesus. Anyways, I keep getting sidetracked. Sorry about that. Finally, there's no new releases hogging my attention. I can pick up where I left off on that script. I still have all my notes, all my footage, everything. I can finally just get down and finish this video. It's one that I'm very much looking forward to talk about. I think I have somewhat of a unique perspective on the game that doesn't really seem to be shared by that many people. I don't think I'm saying anything too radical or anything, but yeah. It's a video that I'm really looking forward to making and getting back to working on. So hopefully I'll see you then. Thank you so much for watching. This is not a video I expect to get too much traction. It's really just like, hey, if you want to hear what I thought about Final Fantasy XVI, here you go. So for anyone that's interested in that, I hope you just enjoyed hearing me talk for, I don't know, I lost track of the recording time, but once again, thank you so much. I hope you guys check out my Final Fantasy II review, which I'm going to start working on, like, right now. Thank you.